Bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Alex Hernandez of Noticias Univision Chicago, which airs every weekday morning at 5 and 6. On the show tonight, a violence prevention movement that hires former gang members gains momentum across the country.
When we tell them, no, you can live your normal, regular life after donating a kidney, they're very surprised.
Bridging the organ donation gap in Latino communities. A big win for preservationists. Landmark status for St. Adalbert Church is one step closer to reality. And get your groove on in Pilsen this weekend. We tell you where to find a house music hub. All that coming up. But our first story tonight, a key landmark vote for a closed church in Pilsen. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
The prayers from some preservationists have been answered. The closed St. Adalbert Church building in Pilsen has cleared an initial hurdle for landmark status from the city. The century-old church will now go through a lengthy approval process. Joining us now with more are Blanca Torres with St. Adalbert Preservation Society. She was also a parishioner at St. Adalbert. And Alderman Byron Cicho Lopez, who represents the 25th Ward. We also reach out to the Archdiocese of Chicago, which owns the building. They declined our invitation, but provided a statement that we'll get to shortly. First of all, thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for being here, but I want to start with you, Blanca. You were at the city's meeting on Monday when this news broke. What was the reaction in the room?
Oh my God, it was electric because we've been waiting for a long time. I know the recent when it started in 2016 with the Renew My Church, with the mergers and closures of the churches, ours was the first in our Pilsen area. And we've been fighting it ever since. We've been fighting canonically, meaning in the Vatican, and that wasn't a successful effort. But then we were also concurrently with our aldermen also fighting civically, which means we were trying to get it landmarked. And we've been trying to get it landmarked since 1974, which is the first time that St. Adalbert was slated to close. Mm-hmm. So this is an ongoing effort because it is such a beautiful landmark and it is such a prominent landmark in the community.
Alderman, you've been part of this movement as well. You and others have been pushing for the church to have landmark status for years. Why has it taken it so long?
Well, we got to remember that especially in the previous administration, this issue came to for a discussion. Unfortunately, we did not get the political will. There's a lot of interest. Unfortunately, there's a lot of this. St. Adalbert is not the only empty parish. We have almost 100 empty parishes within the city of Chicago that the Archdiocese still does not know what to do. Mm-hmm. So the landmark designation has implications, we understand that. But we also know that there's dozens of churches that are also empty on the west side and the south side of the city. And we need a plan. We need a plan that includes parishioners, that includes the residents, that includes a conversation, what are we going to do with these empty parishes? We cannot exclude, or worse, sold these to developers after residents, parishioners have built this with not only their labor, they have been volunteers, but also with the subsidies of their own property taxes. So we do think that it's important that we have a conversation around St. Adalbert as a landmark to bring the investment that is needed to preserve the church, but also a larger conversation with Archdiocese.
Definitely. Blanca, what is your connection with the church?
Well, I've been a lifelong parishioner of St. Adalbert. I grew up there. I went to school there when the school was still open. So, and my parents were, major people, movers and shakers in the church there. My father was basically the caretaker, and my mom was the CCD, and she did a lot of work within the community. And there in our community, I know, the Polish community was the people who built the church, but also within the last 50 years, it has been the Hispanic community with some Polish people, of course, who were there. We had posadas, we had all our cultural and all our cultural events were held there. I mean, it is so paramount to the community to have these cultural touchstones, these cultural landmarks that make it a community. I know they talk about, oh, it's just a building, but buildings are what communities gather around. And and the beauty, I mean, we can't also, say the beauty, it's the beauty and the community. And
the community feels connected to those
Yes,
buildings as
yes.
well. And like we said at the beginning, we actually tried to reach the Archdiocese of Chicago, who owns the property the church is on. They provided the following statement, and I quote, it says, St. Adalbert Church is part of St. Paul Parish in Pilsen. The parish is completing work it started a week ago to protect the property and the sacred items in the church, which were being repeatedly vandalized and destroyed. The need to protect the items was reinforced as the church was broken into again this week. The preliminary landmark status vote by the Commission of Chicago Landmarks does not affect the efforts of St. Paul Parish to protect these items, end quote. Alderman, what does landmark status mean for the church?
So we started this week with a preliminary status of landmarking St. Adalbert. That means that for future use, and again, we were very clear that we want to talk about the exterior and interior. This is a process where we need also the collaboration of the Archdiocese. I think it's questionable if we need their consent because it's no longer a Catholic church. However, I think
it's still their building.
But it's still their building.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that the Archdiocese collaborates with us ethically. I think I think, in my opinion, unacceptable.
Is it costly for them, for the Archdiocese, to keep the building?
It is costly for the taxpayers and I think the Archdiocese has a responsibility. Again, they're subsidized. Their property taxes for our community subsidize these spaces. These have been community spaces for our community in a time where we have lost community centers and we see so much violence. It is only fair that we talk about the repurpose of this space and we do it carefully. This is a landmark that met 4 out of the 7 criteria by the most, by the panel of experts on this field. But more importantly, it's not only protecting the buildings, as Blanca was saying, it is protecting our community and having the self-determination to work together to repurpose this for the benefit of our community. We see the issue with the migrants coming in, and this is not going to stop. Many of them are Catholic. So we do think it is possible and it's important that we work together to find a Bible solution that it starts with the land.
We have less than a minute. We have our time is wrapping up, but I do want to ask, what's next in this process, Blanca?
Well, I think we need to, just like Byron said, we do need to include the Archdiocese. We need to, but also all of us together, working together. I think we could come up with a viable solution still at this point. I know they said they want to take care of the church, but I think it's in taking care of the church, we need to, all of us come together, and so it could become, again, a viable community touchstone and cornerstone.
I want to thank you both, Alderman Byron Cicho Lopez and Blanca Torres, for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. August is National Minority Donor Awareness Month, and local officials are encouraging more people to become organ donors. But historically, the medical mistreatment of people of color has resulted in distrust of the system. With health conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, and kidney disease on the rise in Black and brown communities, reporter Joanna Hernandez tells us how a group of physicians is working to restore trust in the organ donation process.
Meet the team working to break down language barriers.
¿El apetito bien?
Sí, está comiendo ligeramente, no tan pesado.
At UI Health, the Spanish-speaking clinic is helping patients through the kidney transplant process.
Es bueno porque así se da uno cuenta, se quita uno de todo lo que muchas cosas que no entiende médicamente y ellos lo traducen a uno y le entiende uno la situación de cómo está uno.
52-year-old David Rodriguez has had 2 kidney transplant surgeries. He's in today for a checkup.
Se demora unos 3 a 6 meses en recuperarse, más o menos.
Oh, okay.
The clinic is part of the UI Health Kidney Transplantation Program at UIC Hospital. Dr. Jorge Almario Alvarez is one of the doctors who spearheaded the initiative.
We decided to start a Spanish-speaking clinic to try to make more comfortable these interviews with the people, try to clarify all the doubts, and in that way also people may feel more comfortable to ask questions.
Dr. Alvarez says his vision for the clinic is to bridge the information gap in the Latino community.
Sometimes there are some cultural barriers about the surgery, that is something complicated, too dangerous, which nowadays is not like in the past. The outcomes nowadays in kidney transplant are very well.
On the south side of Chicago in the Chatham neighborhood, Harry Wilkins is on a similar mission.
Nationally, there's over 106,000 people waiting for an organ. Most of those are kidneys, and the overwhelming majority, 60% of those, are black and brown communities. The disparities are because those conditions that cause kidney failure are disproportionately represented in black communities.
The former Independence Bank of Chicago is being transformed into an education hub.
In the black communities, the black and brown communities, there is a historical mistrust of healthcare in general.
Wilkins grew up in the Chatham neighborhood, became a trauma surgeon, and is now the CEO of Gift of Hope, an organization providing organ and tissue services.
The only way we can really address that is through education.
Is this what is going to happen here? It's empty now.
Yes, it's empty now. It's under construction. But one of the things is we're going to have community outreach centered here.
Despite there being 7.4 million registered donors in Illinois, there's still a need for living donors. Patient David Rodriguez at UI Health says his journey to find a donor in his family was difficult.
Piensan que el donar se van a morir, mucha gente lo que piensa y no lo hacen.
¿Y ha aprendido ya que eso no es cierto?
Pues a quien nos ha tocado ya lo aprendimos, a los que no, pues siguen en esa situación de no ser donante, ¿ve?
The team at UI Health say myths about donation often steer people away from wanting to donate.
People think that after donating a kidney, they will be on medication, that now they're missing an organ that they need.
At some point, we've all heard the myth that doctors won't work as hard to save your life if you're a registered donor. Wilkins says that's not true.
If you register your intent to be an organ donor, then you become a donor upon your death.
In the meantime, organizations like the Gift of Hope and physicians at UI Health are working to restore trust between communities by giving them access to information.
The patients can feel that there is a place for them where they can come and be seen in their own native language.
For Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
The Gift of Hope Hub in Chatham is expected to open by the end of the year. Up next, details into a violence prevention movement that's gaining steam across the country. Brandis Friedman has that story in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight as part of our Safer City series. So stay with us.
One solution to interrupting the cycle of gang violence that's getting an increasing amount of attention is community-based anti-violence programs. Mayor Brandon Johnson has given these initiatives his backing, along with millions in city funding. The state and federal government have also allocated millions in funding this year for anti-violence programs, ones that hire local residents at high risk of being shot or of shooting others. Many are former gang members. They serve as mediators and peacekeepers in the very neighborhoods where they may have once gotten into trouble. Here to discuss Chicago's violence prevention movement are Chico Tillman, Executive Director of the anti-violence program Ready Chicago, which stands for Rapid Employment and Development Initiative. Benny Lee, an instructor in Justice Studies at Northeastern Illinois University and co-founder of the National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. He's also a former Chicago gang member who spent 15 years in Illinois prisons. Tio Hardiman, Executive Director of Violence Interrupters, and Berto Aguayo, Executive Director of the anti-violence organization Increase the Peace, also a former gang member. So clearly, gentlemen, you're all experts in what it is we're here to talk about, having lived experiences as well. And as we mentioned, anti-violence programs getting a lot of attention, as well as some money from philanthropies and the government. Tio Hardiman, first to you. Any thoughts on why this movement is getting more support now?
Well, the movement is gaining a lot of momentum due to the fact that the gun violence is like an epidemic. It continues to spread across the United States. And then a lot of the proven model type of initiatives like Violence Interrupters, the Institute for Peace, different organizations like Chicago, CRED, just to name a few, and LACE over in the Little Village community. We have proven models, for example, like Violence Interrupters, today, we're working with about 150 high-risk individuals, ex-offenders, and 35% of them we placed into job training programs. The other 35%, they're enrolled back into school, and the remaining 30%, we just offer social services to that population. So the movement is just gaining a lot of momentum because it's being treated as a public health issue, more so than just violence that's taking place on the streets.
Chico Tillman, same question to you. Any thoughts on why this is getting more attention now?
I think there's several reasons. The main reason is that the violence is impacting the economy in ways that's never been impacted before. Another reason is because of the large amount of mass shootings that took place. With the large amount of mass shootings, it caused an impact that we could never imagine, especially during the pandemic, and also with the situation with the uprisings of George Floyd. It was like a perfect storm, and individuals that worked in this particular space are some of the heroes who don't get enough credit that really stopped the pandemic. And that's where government and institutions saw our value at different levels, because we were the individuals that had connections to that hard-to-reach population who had been cast aside by mainstream America.
And I want to talk about some of the work that those folks are doing as well as we get into it. Berto Aguayo, what evidence do you have that lets you know that this work is working?
The evidence is in all the young people that we've been able to take off the streets and turn instructors who are now leading their own programs. I'm sure we all have those young people in all of our programs. I also have firsthand experience, being in a gang myself and knowing that a lot of the reasons why I joined the gang was because I was raised by a single mother in back of the yards in the South Side, in a community with limited opportunities, limited safe spaces, and that's what we try to replicate with Increase the Peace. We try to make sure that we create opportunities for young people to prevent the violence in the first place, create those safe spaces where young people are building relationships and learning skills, learning how to mediate conflicts, but also learning how to be part of the solution. And I think ultimately the evidence is in the work that all of our organizations are doing and the fact that we've been able to transform lives and transform communities in the process.
As we mentioned, 3 of you were once gang members. As you said, many of your staff, probably former gang members who are taking a different path now. Benny, how difficult is it for former gang members who have once been incarcerated to sort of remove themselves from that life when they return home?
It depends on the individual. It's a saying that you have to make time serve you versus serving time. And what that look like, if I'm doing time and I'm gang affiliated and I look at what I left, I got to make that change in the prison. And what they look like, the same gang I'm part of on the street is in the prison. So I got to draw them boundaries with them guys, say, man, I want something different. I'm going to school, I'm trying to take up a trade, because I got some goals I want to meet when I get up out of here. So them guys I'm talking to on the phone, if they so happen to be by my parents' house when I call home, I'm letting them know it's a new day. And when I get out, I don't go around there. I go get a job, get in school, spend time with my children, then they hear Benny Lee out. They hear I'm doing this, so when they see me, they're going to respect me different. You follow what I'm saying? So if you put yourself back in that environment, you're vulnerable to get gunned down, get shot. Like I tell young people, if you're going to reach your goal, the 3 things you got to do. First thing, you got to stay alive. You can't get killed. And you got to ask yourself, can you get killed hanging with certain people or in certain places? How do you minimize the possibility of getting killed? Then second thing, you ain't going to reach your goal locked up. So you got to minimize the possibility of getting arrested. Can you get arrested hanging with certain people and in certain places? Then third thing, you got to become drug-free. You need your mind. Your mind will lead you. Your mind is different from your brain. It's your mind that develops your brain. So just learning that, being educated, right, and then coming from, say, a guy like me, I was a gang leader back in 1967 at 13 years old, one of the largest nations in this city, right? Rank in prison and on the streets.
And I would imagine, if you start that young, it is very hard to make that change later on down the road. But Berto, do you think firsthand knowledge is that, how essential is that when you're making those personal connections in this kind of work, in the community intervention work?
Well, I think that's part of why the violence prevention movement has been growing. It's because it's a recognition ultimately that our communities are part of the solution, and that we need people who have been through these issues to be able to connect directly with other young people. And we also are starting to see a recognition that young people can better engage other young people. And so I ultimately, in my story, it was clear that once someone gave me an opportunity, I was able to turn my life around with a positive mentorship community. And so in our programs, we see day in and day out young people who are able to transform their life through a critical opportunity given by a credible messenger at the right time. And ultimately, once you create those opportunities in safe spaces, it has an exponential effect on the community, because now the young people that I've helped in their development are now teaching and instructing 30 other young people, so on and so forth.
Kind of like passing the gift. Chico Tillman, same question to you. Does former gang experience, how helpful is that in building trust?
I think it's critical because, for one, I understand where they're coming from. I don't pass judgment on individuals, and I'm able to show them a pathway because I travel the same road. I think another thing that's not understood is that if you wanted to go into a jungle, you need people with a particular mindset that's experienced the jungle, or else there'll be fear. How many people do you know run toward violence when they see it happen? Only people who've been in an area or a predicament or environment where violence is common. Most people are afraid, and you need people who can be assertive with individuals who are caught up in that lifestyle. Most people are intimidated by them. But I think the respect comes from, and Roberto alluded to it, what gives me credibility is not just my lived experience, but what the decisions I've made since being in that role and how I prosper. So believe it or not, some of my biggest champions are individuals that still caught up in the cycle of violence, because I represent hope to them that they can change their lives and go down a different path.
And like you said, I imagine it sounds like dangerous work, demanding work. They're underpaid. They're basically working all the time, right? Because you can get a call anytime. Does that make it even more challenging, Benny, to get formerly incarcerated people into this kind of work?
Well, when the person got some insecurities and worried about how their peers see them, that's a struggle. But when you can get a guy to look at himself and start establishing a vision for himself, where he's trying to go, then he start trusting, guys like us that done been down that road and got out of it. And like Chico say, our credibility comes because I was once on death row and all that stuff, but now I'm a professor at a university, so that gives me some credibility. I've shown it's a way out and it's a future. You follow what I'm saying? But it's got to come from the individual having some kind of esteem about himself.
We're almost out of time. I want to get Tio Hardiman back in here. How do you decide, where to deploy violence intervention workers, keeping them safe, and sort of professionalizing it so that they're willing to do it in about 45 seconds?
It's all based on the data. The hotspot areas here in Chicago, it's about street credibility, and it's also based on collaborating with organizations throughout Chicago. We work with the West Side chapter of the NAACP on the West Side. We work with all the organizations, the people here talking today. So all the work that we put in is all based on, do you know the people in the community? Anybody can have access, but do you have influence? I have what you call universal access here throughout the city, because I grew up in Hemorrhagic projects and I grew up around the levels of violence. I know just about everybody on the streets. So that's very important. It's about personal relationships, okay? That's how you stop a killing on the front end.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. I know we could talk about this a lot more. Tio Hardiman, Berto Aguayo, Benny Lee, Chico Tillman, thanks to all of you for joining us. Back with more Chicago Tonight Latino Voices right after this.
If you live in Pilsen, you're in luck. Residents can find a dance floor in their backyard this weekend. My House Music Festival is hosting house DJs for its 8th year. And for the festival's founder, Fernando Nieto, he says it's meaningful to have the festival in the neighborhood.
We really are throwing festivals in our own backyard. So I take a lot of pride in being from the South Side and producing events of quality in the South Side of Chicago. I've always been a firm believer that not everything has to be downtown or the North Side. Like, the South Side can have really nice quality special events as well. If you go to the festival, it's babies, kids, people my age. They're there with their grandparents and their parents. They come out with the lawn chairs, lawn chairs, picnic blankets, and they just camp out for like 8 whole hours in front of the stage. They don't move, and they're just like, it's a whole vibe. It's completely different from any of the other events that we do, and people take a lot of pride in having it in Pilsen. When we started this festival, there wasn't a huge platform for local artists, and that's a big part of it for us. If you look at the lineup, our silent disco and even our opening slots They're all local, up-and-coming DJs from across the city of Chicago. So My Health Music Festival really is kind of like a hub and a platform for up-and-coming talent that doesn't need 20,000 followers on Instagram to get booked. It's really important to continue to not only book big names, yes, but give younger artists the opportunity to shine and get their name out there with other big names.
The festival actually takes place at Harrison Park this Saturday and Sunday. You can find more details on our website. That's going to be our time. That's our show for tonight. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And if you're watching us on Friday night, know that you can also catch Latino Voices and Black Voices on Saturdays beginning at 6. Don't forget also to tune in to Noticias Univision Chicago every weekday morning. I'll be waiting for you. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Alex Hernandez. Hasta la próxima. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.
Fantastic that you all came here tonight to be together with us, a whole evening filled with music.
Friday at 8 on WTTW.